Capital Improvement Program Committee meeting for July 6th, 2023. Let's just go around. We'll start with Joanne, go around the table.
Joanne Duffy, Planning and Economic Development Director.
Brad Parkhurst, community member at large.
Samantha Kearns, Budget Committee.
Gayla Brett, Community at Large Member and Recording Secretary.
Kimberly Peace.
Kelly Boyer, Select Board Representative.
Jim Raymond.
Ellen Markowitz, School Board.
Danielle Besora, Finance and Personnel.
Excellent, thank you everybody. So tonight we're going to hear Public Works and the Sewer Commission. We do have some other business at the end, so no one go scurrying off, but we're going to start with Public Works since you're here. So, and I believe this is, we're looking at page 3 of the matrix. You don't have a new matrix, right?
Provide some package, the worksheets tonight, so Danielle can pass some of those around for me. Thank you, Danielle.
Oh, all right. Oh, yeah, the super fun worksheets.
Thank you.
Okay, so Public Works starts on 113, which is page 3 of the last matrix we had, which was dated 6/14. For those of you that are keeping track of where's my matrix. And then we'll let you get started. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, hi, Adam Jacobs, I'm the DPW Director for the town. So I'll get right into the projects, and then we usually have done the first year of the vehicles. Is that how the board's been handling the vehicles and equipment this year?
Sure.
Okay. Great. All right. So on the project sheet there, as the chair mentioned, line 114 is where we pick up, and that should have the vehicles and equipment first in your packet. So disregard the first 3 pages, but starting on the 4th page I gave you is the project worksheet for the road plan. So the road plan, as most of you know, I'm sure, is involved with reconstruction and maintenance of our town public road network. The DPW maintains about 200 miles of roads in town, everything except private roads, some condo subdivisions, and the state maintained sections of routes 114 and 13, which are everything outside the urban compact zone. The state maintains, but we take care of everything near the village area for both those. Our road plan historically has been well funded, and then short periods of underfunding. And when you underfund a road plan, it can quickly catch up to you and you fall behind. And the further you fall behind, instead of a maintenance overlay of a road, which is maybe 10 years old, you can add a layer of asphalt, a thin layer of asphalt without too much more work to keep your good roads good. If you neglect to maintain those roads and they start to fail to the point where there's a lot of water infiltration, the fines that are underneath the asphalt can wash out, the roads start to heave quite a bit in the spring, and eventually they need to be fully reconstructed. Sometimes additional drainage would have to be added as well. So we try to keep our good roads good with a healthy amount of funding, but not $1 million a mile, which is roughly the rule of thumb for reconstruction of a road. So the longer you go without funding, the more expensive it's going to be in the end. And what we want to avoid is trying to get in a situation which some towns find themselves where they have to bond for their roads. They do a bunch of work all at once, maybe $10 million worth. Nobody likes the bond articles in the first place. They certainly don't like paying for it, but you only get a certain snapshot of the town done, and then guess what? All those same roads become due all at the same time, and then you still have to keep a healthy level of funding year after year. So it's hard to get community support for a large bond article, and then you're going to have to come back to the table for other large bond articles every so often as you go. So we've been in a pretty good system with pay-as-you-go. We've been able to keep a pretty good amount of funding. Starting about 7 years ago, we started to increase where we had been in a default situation. We had a few articles in a row for the taxpayers to vote on to increase the road plan funding and also create the default budget with that number going forward. So it kind of gave us a good baseline. I leveled off a few years ago at a number of $1.6 million. That was pre-pandemic, but we just haven't had enough yet post-pandemic, both with pricing, labor shortages, and commodities that we're able to really say if we're going to need to ratchet that up a little bit more. frankly, we're kind of struggling because we do a lot of the work in-house to save money. But when you're short-staffed, it's hard to get all that done and still accomplish, you know, the 8 to 10% of the road network that we try to get to each year. So we've done some subcontracting of a few smaller drainage projects this year to help plus up our staff. But as you probably can't miss, we've got a pretty large project on South Mast and East Union Street this summer they're trying to accomplish while school is out. Unfortunately, there is also summer camp that is right at the base of one of these intersections. So we've got some challenges there on a main road. But anyway, we try to spread out the road plan geographically throughout town. We spend over half of the money each year on maintenance, so try to keep those good roads good. Our main roads and arterials and collector roads that have more traffic, you know, the Tibbetts Hill, Tyrrell Hill, Page Hill, those types of roads. Usually 10 to 12 years is the maintenance cycle that we try to stay on. We are getting caught up certainly on rebuilding some of the roads that have gone maybe 25, 30, 35, up to 50 in some cases years without anything. But we're into the neighborhoods now, and in particular in Pinardville, a street there takes quite a bit longer and costs quite a bit more to rebuild and add drainage than you know, a street like Tibbetts Hill Road or Terrell Hill or something that in a neighborhood with no gas, no water utilities, no underground. So it's a lot easier to get around off the beaten path. Once you're in the village area or in Pinardville, it's pretty slow going. So anyway, we've tried to spread out our projects that way geographically, both by road type as well as by age and condition. We try to handle as many of the rebuilds ourselves as we can and kind of work our way through. So anyway, that's probably a lot more than you need to know or wanted to know about the kind of the how that all goes.
You want to, we'll take questions as we go through this. Go ahead,
Oh,
Jim.
great.
Well, Adam, I asked you this every year, but you've level funded over time, but we know, you know, ignoring pandemic, you know, inflation will occur, so shouldn't we, would it be prudent to at least increase with these with expected inflation rather than level funding, because it sends a false message to everybody if you say, well, 1.6, you know, now is going to do the same as 1.6 in 2029. It's not.
We certainly could. I'm not, it's tough with asphalt because it can fluctuate both down and up, the asphalt pricing so dramatically, and that's such a big chunk of our road plan that even with the effects of inflation, if asphalt goes down $15 you know, a ton, or oil goes down, you know, $50 a barrel, it's such a wide swing that it's really a little bit of a trick to, you know, all things being equal, I think that would be the thing to do would be build in, you know, a 3 to 5% CPI type inflation. It's such a, I don't want to get in a situation where I've asked for something that then I turn around and can't spend it, and it's been a lot tricky the last 2 or 3 years to say, yep, this is the number that I'm willing to plant my flag in on the hill and say we're confident with that. So if the committee thinks that's a good way to go, I certainly wouldn't fight it. I don't feel super strongly about it, but I just haven't been able to really be guaranteeing even to myself that, you know, 1.6 might be too much if you know, oil prices take a huge tank. So with that, I guess that's kind of the thought process where it's been leveled out. If we're full staff, that's a big if, then, you know, we can kind of guarantee what amount of output we can do as a department. If you know, I lose even 1 or 2 critical positions, that would turn into one whole project that would have to be subcontracted out versus done in-house. So that, you know, for a Pinardville street, that could add almost $200,000 to like a Pine Hill or a Holly Street, which are the next couple that are coming up. That's how much we save by doing it in-house. So there's so many variables that it really makes it tricky to, you know, justify it's only increasing by inflation for the next few years. If, you know, again, if the board wants to go that way, I certainly wouldn't have a problem with it. It's just kind of we're so in flux that
Right.
I want to be able to justify an increase if I'm going to increase, or, you know, a decrease if I'm going to decrease.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a cop-out, but playing it straight with a 1.6 for the next few years, at least until we can kind of see what happens, is my current choice anyway.
Um,
Have the actuals in the past couple of years been close to 1.6 or under? or over?
So we've been close. What usually, the last couple of years, what's happened is we haven't, I think now 3 years in a row, we haven't gotten to the whole road plan. So if we come to the select board after the budget passes, we say we want to do X, Y, and Z, and here's our budget. We haven't been able to accomplish all those. So traditionally, we've encumbered enough funds at the end of each fiscal year to top coat the roads that are rebuilt the previous year. So we base our roads the first season that they're built, and then we come back with the top 1.5 inches of asphalt the second year. We let it winter through if there's any heaves or anything that, you know, might settle. Sometimes we can catch it and fix that before we do the final coat of asphalt. So we usually encumber enough to do those top coats. If we don't get to a road that's on the road plan, that will also add an encumbrance. If there's a half completed project, or we only get through the first half of a street, for instance, we'll encumber the rest. So we've, between actual expenditures and the encumbrance for that, yes, we've been right there.
You've been right there,
Yeah.
okay.
Brad, did you have a question?
Kind of answered it.
Oh,
Yeah, I guess.
so then I think the answer is you're comfortable with the 1.6.
Right now, if it looks like, you know, multiple years in a row, I think I'm down 3.5 full-time equivalents right now. If that stays status quo, if oil pricing stays relatively stable and doesn't go to where people are paying you to take oil again like it did 2 years ago, if you know, nothing else major changes, I think probably this time next year we'll have one more year under our belts to, you know, point to. But as of right now, that would be my recommendation. We keep the 1.6.
Okay. Okay, good. We can go on to the...
Okay there, all right. So the next one up should be traffic signal upgrades. This is the final year of a 5 or 6 year project to get through all of this town-owned traffic signals in Pinardville. We have intersections at Maston Pinard, Foch Street, Joffrey Street, Daniel Plummer, the old Shaw's Plaza, now the Fun City Plaza, the signals at 114, 114A, the main intersection are DOT owned. The signals at Henry Bridge and 114 are DOT owned. We also, as a town, own school zone signals, both on Mast Road in Pinardville and Elm Street in the village. We own flashing lights for the fire stations at Central Station and Pinardville Station. And I feel like I missed, and rail trail crossings. We have 2 on 114 in the state maintained section of road, but the town's rail trail crosses, so the town owns those signals, the Hawk signals at both crossings of the rail trail on Mast Road. And we also own a hybrid beacon, I can't remember the name of it, on Henry Bridge Road, and that's a little slightly different, but it's more of a warning for an enhanced crosswalk there on Henry Bridge for the rail trail. So all those collectively make up our town traffic signals. We've been trying to work our way through primarily the typical Christmas tree light, 3-light traffic signals at intersections in Pinardville. So with this final year, the hope is to get back to where we started, which is at Pinard Street. There are a few pedestrian improvements that weren't made when this program was first started there that need to happen. We're converting all the intersections to video detection, which uses a camera with motion sensing rather than inductive loops, which are in the pavement. So that's how historically traffic intersections have sensed a car is there. They have these loops of wire, and the car drives over and it creates a magnetic field, and that tells the signal cabinet that there's somebody there waiting to take a turn. They break over time as heaves happen. It's a pretty common weak point in the pavement. When they're saw cut in, they put up epoxy or a bonding agent inside, but that typically will peel up, crack sealing type stuff. So over time, they get damaged and have to be repaired, usually in the winter with plows and all that. So we've converted now, will be after this summer, 3 of the intersections to video. And that is pretty nice because we can also get notifications if there's a flash or trouble at an intersection. Or if somebody says, hey, I was sitting here for 10 minutes and it never turned. A, you're very patient, but B, let's go in and find out if there's something wrong with the video, if the camera's misaligned now or something. But it's not like a traffic camera, so there's no kind of red light functionality or anything like that. And it's not monitored, not recorded. So if there's an issue, we'll log on and you can see the actual intersection and see if it's triggering. But other than that, there's no enforcement attached to it. The police department doesn't have access, anything like that. So it's worked pretty well, knock on wood. We did have some pretty extended issues with loops, as you might have noticed over 9 months or so ago in Pinardville before the cameras came in. It was pretty rough, but we knew the cameras had been ordered and they're on the way, so we just kind of let it ride without the loop sensing. But it's pretty tedious to sit there and wait if there's no other cars from any direction and it's still changing but not giving you a green light. So anyway, so that needs to happen. As I said, there's some pedestrian improvements both for push buttons, some tip downs. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but I think there's some cabinet hardware there at Pinardville too that wasn't changed in the first year of the program that should be. And then we'll be all current and up to a modern standard. The other nice thing that this does is gives us functionality in the future if we ever wanted to coordinate all the signals. It will allow them all to be on the same time and keep time together. So when they're programmed, hopefully it will help the overall throughput of the Mass Road corridor. But in the future, if we ever wanted to do some sort of adaptive signals where the actual intersection will learn what the patterns of the day are, and so you don't have a set program, it'll just say, oh, I know that every December 23rd there's a big influx of cars coming down Daniel Plummer. It'll change the timing of the intersection on its own for that. So that's called adaptive signals. It's more of a big deal when you have a larger network than we do, side streets that all have signals as well. But it does give us that functionality if we ever did want it in the future. So good project, and it'll be nice to be done because we're kind of sick of dealing with traffic signals for a little while.
Brad?
Question. Now, like 114, 114A, we're responsible or DOT?
That's DOT.
Okay. And the other one is, I thought the crossing for the rail trail were paid for by the rail trail for many years.
Those
But
were
we're responsible for them.
it was a federal grant. I believe that one was a transportation alternatives grant, if I'm not mistaken. So largely federally funded through the state of New Hampshire, but the deal with that one is if you take the cheese and take the grant money, and you ask the DOT to allow a crossing for a crosswalk, that we have to maintain those. So,
Okay.
so even though they're on DOT sections, we pay for any maintenance or upgrades.
Thank you.
So I do have a question about it. So this is traffic signal upgrades, and I guess I don't know that I realized, or maybe people realize, that the traffic signals are sort of separate from the road plan. But is there, like, every 2 years or every 3 years, will we need another $10,000 or something to maintain? So it seems like we're doing this and then we have nothing in the future. Like, the traffic signals will all be set for 10 years, or?
We do also carry operational budget for traffic signal maintenance,
Okay.
just for the regular stuff that fails, loop sensors, that's a bad example, but
Light bulbs.
maybe the light bulbs or the Opticom, which is the preemption systems for the fire department. They flash their strobes and now it gives them a green light. There's a system that's attached to the posts and the mass arms, which feeds into the signal cabinet to do all that. So if those things fail during the year, that's what our operating budget is largely for. These are more for the, hey, we know we need $20,000+ worth of hardware all in one shot. So
Okay.
that's what we use this for. So we're trying to get the cabinets, the equipment in the cabinets, and all the signal heads and buttons upgraded with this project, and then maintain it with the operating budget.
Good, okay.
All set there? Anybody else have any? Okay. So next up should be Center Street 18-foot culvert replacement. So this one's been on there several years as well. The name of the project is 18-foot culvert. It is a corrugated metal what's called a multi-plate or a multi-section culvert there. That's right at the base of Locust Hill Road, between Locust and Tibbetts Hill Road on Center Street. So as you enter Grassmere from Elm Street. It's, a lot of people don't even know it's there. It's a pretty good size embankment, and it's just guardrail. It doesn't look like bridge rail or anything, so it's, unless you knew there's a stream crossing there or look really far over the side, you might not even know. But there's an 18-foot culvert there. It is aging. Years ago, we had a consulting engineer come through, Quantum, I think it was 2013. It was 2013. They gave us a report kind of highlighting some issues that we ought to put into our CIP in the future. So Center Street was on there. They also, these multi-plate culverts tend to fail pretty quickly. Once you, some of you may remember we had a corrugated metal culvert on East Dunbarton Road a couple Christmases ago that failed overnight. Usually the failure mode is about the same. You get some rust out near the bottom, and then the backfill of the culvert starts to slough down and get carried away with the rushing water, and then the higher currents make that happen faster, and it kind of accelerates, and then all of a sudden you've got sinkholes that develop on the street, and then you're pretty much, got to shut it down. So we don't want that street to be shut down on it, on somebody else's timeline. We want to make sure we plan for this because it's a pretty big deal. Obviously, a lot of traffic involved there. So a few years ago, we requested that this area, it's big enough, it's over 12 feet, so it qualifies for the as a bridge under New Hampshire DOT guidelines. So it qualifies for state, or it did at the time qualify for state aid bridge aid funding. That program is an 80-20 split, so the state, using a combination of state and federal funds, will pay for 80% of any eligible project if it's accepted into the program. They put it in their 10-year plan, which includes other types of projects, but a lot of it is the bridge aid program. And then 20% is the responsibility of the local community. We were able to get this one in and accepted before that program closed down. They didn't have enough funding, and too many red listed bridges and other bridges that have been accepted or programmed in for the foreseeable future. Kim may have better info than I about the current state, but the last I heard, they may they've had this, a lot of the infrastructure money is starting to feed its way into these types of programs, so they will be reopening, or they have soft reopened the bridge aid program, but they're only accepting new bridges to be added that are already red listed or downrated, and none of our bridges in town right now have been or are on the red list. So we're in good shape, and it's nice that we had this accepted into the program years ago, because it wouldn't qualify now, or wouldn't get us accepted now if we had asked the last few years. So, long way of saying we've got a big bridge project coming up on Center Street. Initially, when a project is accepted into the program, what happens is DOT will create, based on the size of it, an estimate, a rough estimate of here's your number that we're going to plug in 10 years from now for a bridge project. Those are always, I shouldn't say always, but I'm sure they're probably always well under what the actual cost is going to be, and they've kind of identified their own process is a little flawed here. As you get closer to that project actually happening, you start to do things like pay for consultants for preliminary engineering, and then final design. Each of those, and as you get closer, DOT's estimate gets a little better too. Our preliminary engineering has been completed. We're not in final design yet. It hasn't been accepted by the DOT, which is the next step, but just at the stage we're in now, they've already identified that this bridge is going to be a fair bit more expensive than it had been in previous CIP cycles. So it's jumped up quite a bit based on just what it costs to put a bridge in. Right now, the recommended replacement for this structure would be a precast concrete arch with a similar embankment over it, so it wouldn't have a bridge type rail on top. It would look similar from the road, but it would be a precast bridge arch that the DOT has approved accelerated bridge construction methods, and that would be a good example of that. Would be a precast structure that can be fit up, formed up, off-site, craned in, and hopefully prepped and lifted in a pretty short period of time, rather than trying to form concrete on site after you've already shut the road down and extending that closure. So the goal for this project would be to close it after school ends, so we don't impact Mountain View traffic. and then hopefully get it reopened, with a pretty short turnaround before school starts back up again. So right now, we've got it programmed in with the best numbers that we have from our consultant engineers preliminary engineering study. Once it's accepted by the DOT, one of the next things we have to do is kind of have a negotiation meeting with them about the proposed, or the estimate of cost right now. If the DOT accepts that, they'll give us permission to enter final design with the consultant. And then we'll get even better numbers as the final design progresses and we see, okay, this is an assumption that was made during the preliminary engineering that is no longer valid, or we didn't think of this, but now we have to add that. So this number likely will change again by the time the construction of it comes around. It's slotted for year 2025 in the state's 10-year plan, which means we can ask for reimbursement funding no earlier than 2025. Just the way the process is probably going to play out, we will likely be advertising for bids for construction to be in 2026, the summer of 2026. So still keep it in 2025 because we will have to ask the town, for the funds in the budget for 2025 because it's a reimbursement program we pay, and then there's certain stepping points along the way. You pay whatever it is, 30% or 40%, and they'll reimburse that. And then as you get closer to the end, they'll have other reimbursement.
Right, it's kind of artificial to be on the CIP because it is, we have to front the cost, but then we get reimbursed. So we actually will only have to pay 20% of that about, right? That 4.2 is not just our 20%, that's the total. Right. And then we will ultimately get reimbursed, but we have to front the cost.
That's right.
Right.
Yep. So if you look, so lines 116 and 122 would be the two lines for you that would be involved with this project. So you see the full cost of 4.2 under line 116 for year 2025. But then if you drop down to line 122, which is the last before the blue section, you'll see a credit of 3.36 million. That's the 80% from the state aid program. And again, like you said, it's kind of artificial because some of that reimbursement will come in 25 and some will probably come in 26. Some might even come in 27, depending on when the completion is, final completion. So,
can we get mobile funds for construction?
Potentially. They've qualified us for the, is it mobile, or there's another federal bucket that we originally weren't programmed in for.
The MOBAR maybe.
Yes, that's the one, thank you. Which I think they've now added because of this new estimate of cost. They're thinking they're going to have to move us into that category, but it should hopefully be the same requirements.
Yeah. When the bridge is down, the traffic goes that way, that means all traffic goes through the village. Is there any consideration be given? I don't even know how you control the traffic, that traffic going through the village with parking on both sides of the road and the intersections. But is there anything being considered to help that? It's crazy now anyway, but that's going to be.
It's tough.
It's going to be.
Part of the reason the DOT is kind of soft agreed to the accelerated construction, which increases the cost a little bit of construction usually, sometimes not, is because of the length of detour. There's no real two ways around it. You're either going way into Dunbarton and then back down, or you're going around the lake, like you said, on 114. So it's going to be a pretty significant detour. We haven't, as part of final design, some of those traffic considerations, a little finer details of, okay, do we need to do anything with Main Street? Do we need to do anything with temporary signals somewhere else that they currently don't exist?
With no parking on one side, I don't even know how you can do that because there's not enough parking anyway, but I'm like, just going through the village at certain times of day is,
Could
it get brutal.
Could very well be the case, right?
I'm always clicking into my New Yorker attitude for driving when I go through the village.
I think, I don't have my traffic counts with me, but, the 114 corridor is roughly, 25,000 cars a day. Elm Street, Center Street's probably got to be 8, 9, 10, 11,000, I would think, in that section where you kind of get everybody. And that's without school traffic, so, yeah, it'll be a bit interesting as the project progresses through that final design. That kind of stuff kind of gets fleshed out a little bit, and we'll be back with the select board to kind of gauge their appetite for that type of stuff.
What you're doing right now at the base of Tibbetts Hill Road, that has nothing to do with that one.
No, that was a sinkhole,
Sinkhole.
which apparently couldn't wait just a couple more years until we've got the whole area closing up. And no, we had a untimely sinkhole open up overnight somebody's driveway. So no,
Not during the school year.
right, yes, yeah, it was timely enough, I guess. Okay, so that's that project. Unless anybody else has any questions about that one. Okay, the next one up then, line 117, Henry Bridge over the Piscataqua River. So this one is kind of an interesting line item. So a few years ago, as part of that same study we had townwide, they had identified for this particular bridge some short-term repairs that were needed and then some longer-term repairs. The bridge is not red listed now. It was briefly because right before the short-term fixes were implemented, the state inspection found some things they didn't like. But we had some abutment work, some bridge seat repairs, some scaling of the concrete abutments that was repaired. Some of the one section of the abutment is older mortared stone work, so we had some mortar repairs done. A few things with some of the joints, something else I'm sure, but I can't remember. Anyway, a couple years ago that we had that project on CIP and was completed. And at the time, kind of placed off in the future, hey, this is going to need a deck replacement and or a full superstructure replacement. It's the only real issue is that it's functionally obsolete from a width perspective. It's a little narrower than a new bridge would be. This bridge was a sort of a kit bridge that US Bridges is the name of the company. They have pre-engineered bridges you can buy and assemble them on site. So it's a little smaller than we'd like in New England, especially with wing plow trucks that come through. There's a couple spots that you kind of see have been battle scarred. But other than that, the superstructure of the bridge is in pretty good shape, and it's not really hurting anybody. The deck itself, however, is starting to ratchet itself up to the top of the priority list. So that has a corrugated steel decking that's set down on the structural steel girders that are underneath. And the corrugated steel then is paved directly on top. So think of it like those tin roofs you might see on a shed, and then it's literally pavement right on top of that. There's a pretty good water infiltration as those bridges age. The asphalt, the problem is it's good for the southern states, but when you have a lot of cracking and salt introduction to northern states in the asphalt itself, and it migrates, then you start to lose the corrugation underneath. So there's not not many huge spaces in between structural members, so it's not like a car is going to fall through the corrugation down below, but you do, we're starting to develop some potholes in the bridge that can't just be patched because there's problems with the corrugation of the deck below. So rather than program in a full superstructure replacement, I've changed this to just a deck replacement. We've got some tentative numbers for materials already from US Bridges. It's going to be about 80 to 85,000 in materials. Then you figure there's some other, obviously, issues with labor and traffic control and all that kind of stuff to get to this this plan of 175. I should probably put a pretty good asterisk on this because we've got some areas that need spot repair, but we're meeting with the company that did the abutment work to see what they would recommend for the project itself. And if we think we can get it done with the additional bridge funds that were included in the previous legislative session under SB 401, Danielle, is that right? Yes, there were two in a row, one a couple years ago and then one last year. SB 401 included some additional highway funds for the highway block grant funding and then additional bridge aid funds, which can only be used for bridges. So I'd like to, if we can do it, so there was that last year, and then this year with the new state budget, there was a second round of that same type of thing. So we haven't got the final numbers yet, but there's additional highway block grant funding coming this year and additional bridge funding coming. So I think we're going to have enough to do two things with that additional bridge funding. Like I said, our bridges in town are in pretty good shape other than what's here on the CIP. So I think we're going to be able to probably fast track this deck replacement with that additional bridge funding, and we'll just take this out of CIP by this time next year, I'm hoping this will just be off and gone and done. But also, we can take some of those funds and put them towards the town's 20% for the Center Street Bridge project. So it won't be quite as tough an article to, or however the board wants to handle the budget impact of the 4.2 million. So hopefully a little help on both those two projects. Any questions about this one? Yes.
This is just for my own information. I remember, I still have a memory, that that bridge was originally put in about 1995.
Sounds about
I may be
right.
off a year, one way or the other. I can remember when they put it in. Now, is it
Definitely late 90s, yep.
for the deck of the bridge, is that what the expected life is in a northern climate?
You know, we didn't ask them. We probably could get that number. I mean, to me, it sounds about right, you know. I've got here in my notes, it was a 96, 97 project.
I was off by a year.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess we're pushing 27 years now, you know, this year. So that's pretty good for, you know, an
Okay, that was
asphalt-based deck.
better. I realize it's not wide enough, but
Yeah. It just seems like a whole lot of money to spend just to gain a couple feet of width, and we haven't, you know, knock on wood, we haven't had any terrible accidents there or anything. And plow trucks know that it's a narrow bridge, so we try to go slow, but if the lights are on, hopefully people are obeying the, you know, the whole give way to the
Yeah.
emergency lights and wait if they have to, but it's, you know, otherwise it's in decent shape, so, yeah, I'd like to think we could get more than 30 years out of a bridge and not have to replace the whole thing, so I think to get the deck
that was why I
done-
asked the question.
yeah, to get 25 to 30 years out of a deck is pretty good.
Okay, thank you.
Any others? Okay, let's see, Smith Road. Kind of along similar lines, we've got a number of larger culverts in town that aren't big enough to be classified as bridges, at least yet. We have some that are culverts now, and if the proper engineering is done, they have to turn into bridges because of the size of the stream that goes through them. But any streams that are you know, not just seasonal and larger water courses. So this Smith Road culvert now is closer to the Maple Ave intersection. It's 64 inches by 43, so it's kind of an arch, a corrugated metal arch. So similar to that Center Street Bridge, those corrugated metals can go pretty fast. Most every corrugated metal pipe we pull out of town now is, you know, Swiss cheesy appearance. But certainly the bigger they get, the more expensive they are to replace, and the more critical it is that we replace them on our timeline instead of waiting for them to fail, because it does turn into quite a task to get mobilized, get equipment, and get even precast or metal or even plastic piping of this size in short order. There's a long lead time. So that certainly is not a street we want to have shut down for any good length of time either. Another one that would be a summer project because of the school traffic, especially now with the new pattern at Maple Avenue. We're sending everybody up Elm Street, up High Street, and
That was going to be
over
my
Smith
question.
Road.
Is that still in effect, or
It
going
is.
to be in effect?
It is working well. PD's not here, but I'll put in a plug for them. And kudos, it was good. I think
Okay.
it's worked out well from the school's perspective, and certainly the traffic on Elm Street's quite a bit better than it was during school hours. So anyhow, this one is definitely one we'd need to do during school break. It's large enough. We haven't done any engineering on it yet, other than the fact that the condition of it is, you know, getting deteriorated, and it would be a good one to get on CIP. With project pricing, rough estimate just based on other similar size projects we've had to have permitted, either the East Dunbarton. We're in the process for a stream crossing on, let's see, I can't think, Kimberly, help me out?
Upton? No.
Tim,
Shaken? I have something about it.
we've got a design project for a culvert about this size right now on
Which part of town?
East Dunbarton, and then Montalona, thank you. Montalona. So we've got one on Montalona that probably is going to
Oh, that was the second one, right?
That one's
The
going
first
to
one was
turn
the
into a
Bay.
bridge, Anyhow, so it's definitely one that's going to be a little bit of a longer process, and we want to make sure it's a CIP type item going forward. So that's really all I've got on that one.
Can you do that much for 100,000?
It largely will depend on what the hydraulic study or the hydrology study of the catchment area for that stream tells us. I don't know what tier that stream is, and if it's right now the 250-year event, right, Kimberly, for stream may. With those numbers now changing, that may dictate that that one becomes a bridge, might be a full span. Culverts aren't the greatest, aren't good for fish passage, aquatic life. The best thing for nature is a stream bed. A lot of these larger culverts, in order to maintain a stream bed like bottom, you either have to replicate that by putting gravel in a large pipe, or if one pipe isn't big enough to pass 250 years worth, the 250-year storms worth of water, it starts to get too big for a single structure, and it turns into a span or a concrete, precast box culvert. So there's a chance that this one will be quite a bit bigger. The one on Mauna Lona is significantly larger based on the engineering than it currently is.
Whereabouts on Mauna Loma?
It's the same water course that went under East Dunbarton that
The
we
East
lost,
Dunbarton one, yeah.
but it's right near East Dunbarton, that first culvert you cross as
Okay.
you turn on the Mauna Lona from East Dunbarton.
Has it flooded?
We've been up to the road since I've been here. I don't believe we've lost it. At least we don't have a record of it being lost yet.
You can't really line it. Can't really put a pipeline or anything.
Right. So the tough part for us is the state's stream crossing culvert maintainer rules is what we usually operate under for smaller culverts up to 36 inches, but up to 48 inches, I'm sorry. They will allow us to swap a 48-inch culvert without full permitting, but if you want to line a 48-inch culvert, it's not allowed under the program. So we found out on Leech Hill recently, we had a pipe that was nearly lost during one of the storms in the spring, and we wanted to line it, and I said, if you're going to line it, it's a full-blown engineering. If you want to swap it, you can do it under the culvert program, so that's what we did. But so it's a kind of, I don't know if it's on purpose, but it's a strange little donut hole of the law that doesn't allow some simpler maintenance items to be done. And then once you get into engineering, that's when it kind of, okay, now that we're looking, how big does this really need to be? That's when they kind of get carried away. So, but this is a little bit more than we spent on the East Dunbarton project a couple years ago. Similar sizing, so as of right now, anyway, that's our best guess of approximately what it would cost.
That's the one on Smith Road we're talking?
Yes, yep, Smith Road, sorry.
The one in the future on Mauna Loma, that is the future?
That one will, as soon as we get, so I should step back. That project is not on here because we actually applied for hazard mitigation funding from FEMA and Homeland Security through the state. If that project's approved, it was a short-term, it's either 90 or 95% federally paid share. So they had a very short window of time. Anybody have any projects they want to send up for hazard mitigation funding? And we thought, because we had just lost the one on East Dunbarton Road, and this is the same water course, roughly the same size culvert to begin with, why not? Let's send it their way and see if it gets approved. So we still don't have final approval from them that the grant's been approved, but if it is, then that likely would drop in here in a pretty short fashion, either 25 or 26 maybe. But until that process plays out, we don't know. It's nothing that we have ratcheted up to the top yet for planned work.
So your bottom line here on line 124 in pink, that's all money that would be included in your overall operating budget?
So let's see. So 124. Oh yeah. So the only other piece then to me, mine is line 121. we've got programmed in 12,000 a year in impact fees. That's, I think we've got like 65 or 70,000 right now in our road impact fee account. We try to use roughly whatever is going to expire that year in that year's operation somehow. And usually Danielle has to remind me. We go to the board and request to apply some of those impact fees before they do expire. We don't have a problem spending them, that's for sure. But so I think that's roughly about what we take in on any given year in impact fees. So that's what we've put in there.
I was just looking at the
So
bottom
then you
line.
look, so then that bottom line now is reflective of that 12,000 in revenue for those years. Yes. So as you look at line 124, that takes into account all the revenues.
So when you submit your operating budget for next year, these monies will be included.
So for the, yes, 2024, we would include this, and then through the budget process, it would be determined which would make their way into operating or which would be kept out as
But
capital.
it's reimbursement. You gotta-
Pardon?
It's a reimbursement program. We gotta spend the funds.
The impact fees we have to spend.
Well, no, but your tax impact may be 24, but if you're getting reimbursed for the projects, we have to
That's right.
appropriate the funds.
That's right. So when the,
Explain that to the
Thank you.
voters.
yep, so when the, I would be amazed if the Center Street project doesn't end up as a special article. I think that's too big a hit to add to the operating side as a capital project. So almost guaranteed that will be an article. And that article will explain, will have also the revenue associated with. If the article passes, then the expected revenue gets put in for the accounting end, and then the
Okay.
cost of the project.
What year would that be?
Probably will be on the 2025 ballot. If our final design kind of takes a hard turn, then it could be pushed to 26, but 2025 is the earliest possible year we could spend it.
The Smith box, the Smith Road culvert isn't large enough to be considered a bridge?
Not yet. 12 feet is the cutoff. 12 or 10? 10, I'm sorry, 10 feet. So it's not that big yet. There's a chance that it will become one if we choose to do it. So then that kind of starts to raise different questions. So if the engineering for that, if the project's approved, and we include it in the operating budget for that year, we do the engineering says, yes, this needs to be a bridge, then we kind of do a timeout and find out where we're going to come up with these funds for probably 6, maybe 7 figure.
And then for the bridge reimbursement, the state reimburses 80% of it, no matter what it is.
Those are for projects that have been accepted into the state aid program. For something like Smith Road, for a new bridge, probably zero chance we'd be able to get that into the
Yeah,
program.
I guess like I'm like shifting questions. I was like, I don't know.
Sure.
But I guess my thought is like because we're not building the bridge, we're hiring a company, we're contracting it out, right?
Correct.
So if the company that we contract out in 2025, 2026, if we were like looking at inflation and their cost increases suddenly, the state is still reimbursing us 80%, regardless of what that cost is.
Maybe. So what happens is,
Sorry.
no, it's okay.
Sorry for asking it so
And it's a
question.
good question because it happens. What will take place is through final design, we'll get the best number that we have. This is what this project is going to cost. Presuming DOT still has enough funding to keep our project in that year, which is pretty good, chances. Then we go out to bid. If bids don't come in close enough to that number that the DOT can swallow that change, or that frankly, I guess the town can swallow, because we have that piece too that we would have to, make up the gap. Then it's probably back to the drawing board. Okay, are there different ways to do this? Do we rebid? It kind of, extends that project timeline even more. Might have to wait until the next year if the town's only voted 4, but lowest bid comes in at $6 million. Guess we're going to go back to the ballot next year with $6 million and see, 6.2 or whatever, inflation might do to it. So it could very well kick. There's so much infrastructure money right now flying around and so few people in the labor market, a lot of these companies are not even bidding on bridge projects. So the state's had several that have had one bidder. Sometimes if there's one bid and it's far enough off of the state's and the design engineer's estimate, they won't even accept a single bid. They'll require a rebid just because they don't trust it as a sole bidder. So it's kind of a hairy climate right now for bidding. So there's a strong chance that might take multiple years on the ballot.
Thank you. Alan, go ahead.
I just heard the word bond again. And I mean again. I'm trying to keep track of it, and it's, I'm looking at long-term planning here. We've got the library bond, a Parks and Rec bond.
Yeah, we have a lot of bonds in 2025.
We've got a school bond coming, probably, all around the same time.
And if I apologize if I said the word
whoa.
bond. I hope I didn't. Maybe I said article. Maybe I said bond article. If I said bond article, I apologize. I don't think it would be a bond article. It would probably just be a special article asking the town to raise from taxation with offsetting revenue from this program and that. But it would be wouldn't require the 2/3, 3/5 vote. But
So special
so
article.
this one probably wouldn't be big enough to trigger a bond if that scenario where there's no bidders or one bid or all the bids are well over this and you start getting into, I mean, God forbid, $8, $9, $10 million project, then I think it's reasonable to talk about a bond at that point, but really hate to.
Then they have warrant article here for fire station. Seems like there's a lot, and I
Yeah,
don't
but
know in what
I
years.
believe these are all projections out for different years, not, they're not.
2025?
They're not, they're all in 2025?
24, 25, 26, around the same time.
I thought the school one was like 2020, 2030,
Well,
Yes,
the big
yes,
number
before.
ones are, right.
The big number one, but is it?
and next year it was like Parks and Rec. The
Well,
following
that's
year.
why I brought it up, and I
Following
know
year
we're
is,
not budget committee, but there's a lot.
following year is the school.
Right, right.
I'm just doing this off the top of my head.
Let's let Adam go through his presentation, and then we're definitely going to have to do some horse trading when we get to the end. So but let's go back to page 2. So we have Public Works vehicles in the matrix, and I am not going to ask you to go over all of these.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
Adam, are any of these new vehicles, or is this just the standard replacement schedule?
These are replacements for existing. Yep.
Right. And I think the most important part is when we look at the bottom line, it seems like you've tried to balance them out quite a bit, kind of grouping them together based on needs and things.
I do. I think, just as much as replacing the equipment, it's important to try to get the taxpayers at least some sense of from one year to the next. You're not going to have these crazy leaps. So, in general, I probably could be criticized for hanging on to certain things too long. I'm willing to buy used equipment if I think it's something that we could afford to have a piece of equipment that's a couple years old. So I think in general that's probably some of these are not a very aggressive replacement cycle. But in general, what we like to do is replace our heavy plow trucks, which are used year-round, both for construction projects and for winter maintenance on the shortest cycle. So keep those running because they are emergency equipment for several months a year and need to be ready to go. The other equipment, we tend to have longer replacement schedules. We've got a motor grader that's a 1992. Trying to phase it out, but just as an example. So coming up for 24 for proposed items, we've got a couple of older trailers. We've got a 1999 Ecoline. It's called a tag or a tag-along trailer. This is used for our heaviest equipment. Requires a Class A license to operate. But it's the only one that we've got that's big enough to handle some of our larger equipment. That being said, it's not large enough to handle our bulldozer, or when we rent a large, we have a smaller vibratory roller for our smaller projects or for small trenches. When we do a full road reclamation project, we end up renting larger rollers or Continental might provide them from, as part of their paving crew. But when we rent those larger pieces of equipment, or when we need to move our bulldozer, we have to pay a tow company to come get them and move them to the project site and then back. You can't just drive a roller down Mass Road for 4 miles, maybe a couple hundred feet, but you don't want to go cross country with a dozer either. So we do spend some money every year on rentals, but obviously it's getting pretty old. It's 99 and that's how we used. So we'd like to replace that. We'd like to get something a little bit heavier with the weight rating, so we can do that heavier equipment and cut down some of those mobilization costs that we have. I'm going to jump over the 2009 International Dump and just talk about our second trailer because it's similar. We have a 2009 14,000-pound equipment trailer. This one's also a Class A to operate. Once you're over 10,000 pounds weight rating on a trailer, you trigger a Class A license is required to have a combination unit like that. So we only have a few people that can even drive these, but this equipment trailer is used pretty often for moving precast concrete drainage structures or manholes, iron, the heavier stuff that we have, it's too much for like a landscape type trailer. So pretty heavy use, and we do have multiple construction crews going, so sometimes our Class A, we only have a couple, our Class A drivers might bounce from one site to another all day long, and they really love that, but they end up being the kind of the gophers who take the big trailers to go get the heavy equipment or the materials. So anyhow, we've got 2 of them. This one has got some pretty beefy ramps. We'd like to get something that might have a little better spring assist, so you're not throwing out your back when you try to get the ramps lifted. We'd also like going forward to get more Class A operators, of course, to get that extra flexibility. But for right now, we kind of are limited. Okay, so then jumping back up to line. I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Are you going to go through all of them?
Just the 24s.
Okay.
Is that what you want to do?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kimberly, or did you not even want me to go through all the 24s?
Say what you feel like you need to say to justify your numbers.
Okay, all right.
It's a lot of numbers.
All right. I'll go quick then. Okay, so we've got one 6-wheel dump truck, so that's our larger dump truck, but not our largest. We also have a 10-wheel tri-axle dump trucks. But our 6 wheels are kind of the bread and butter for the department. As I mentioned, we have combination bodies that were used year-round. So we we load them up with materials for the jobs. We dig out of them with an excavator to fill in the trenches and the drainage areas. Throw stumps in them, boulders, all that kind of stuff. And then in the winter we lift the floor plates up, and they are filled with salt, and there's a hidden spreader underneath the combination body that acts as a normal spreader for a salt truck, and of course they plow. So we've got one that's a 2009, so it'll be 15 years by the time it's ready to go. That particular truck, that particular vintage of International trucks had what's called a Max Force engine that several year period, highly unreliable nationwide, just for whatever reason, as some of the diesel emissions changed over the years. Their attempt in that model family was not the greatest of the other manufacturers. So that one's been pretty problematic.
But it seems like if you get 15 years out of it, that's pretty good.
That's right. We do we specify stainless steel bodies, which is a little bit more expensive on the upfront cost, but they definitely last longer. And when you're throwing salt in them, all winter long, it extends the life of these trucks by quite a bit. A lot of towns are faced with, they have a rotten dump body. The truck itself still runs, but your dump body needs to be replaced. And by the time you start talking about tearing that off, and while you're off, you might as well do this, that, and the other. And now it's, you're almost buying a whole new truck at that point. So those stainless bodies are a good investment. They do allow us to get the extra time out of them. Okay, so I got to the Brymar trailer. We've got, this one's probably the most important. I think I put it as number 1 on my worksheet, if you even care, on the worksheet. But truck 374 for us, line 50. It's a Peterbilt truck with a brand called New Way. It's a curbside collection truck for our trash and recycling. This one has been the trash truck now since it was purchased new. It's been the frontline truck, so 7 years. We have 3 trucks currently, and They are very complicated piece of equipment. They're automated trucks. As you probably all know, we don't have anybody in the back throwing bags into the back of a truck anymore. We have an automated arm, so it's cut down on labor costs significantly. But all of that extra automation comes with a lot of repairs. So they're 1,000 barrels a day, and it's all moving in hydraulics, so they're kind of nightmares to maintain. They run 4 days a week. Right now, we've been able to run 4 days a week with just one truck for trash, one for recycling. But increasingly, we are into our backup truck more often than not. So for whatever reason, one of those 3 trucks always seems to be down, as Kelly and Danielle can probably attest. They're always on the action matrix for the select board as being at the dealer or being down in shop for some maintenance or another. And a lot of the heavier trucks, for good or for bad, with the Diesel Emissions Reductions Act, the new Tier 4 standards have led to a lot of emissions system problems, especially for trucks that tend to operate at lower speeds. So if you have a highway truck, you can burn off carbon in the system at 65, 70 miles an hour. When you're operating dump trucks or curbside collection trucks at low speeds, or moderate speeds, and then putting on the brakes and idling while you pick up a barrel and then driving 20 more feet, they're pretty tough on the emission system. A lot of soot buildup, and they're pretty complicated. But the turbos and the exhaust gas recirculation systems get all clogged with soot, and that just chain reaction. So that's usually why they're out of service for one reason or another related to the emission systems. But anyway, long way of saying they definitely need to be replaced on a regular cycle. Normally what happens is we take off the truck that's up for replacement and move it to the backup status, and we auction off or trade in the backup truck. What's going to happen, or my proposal anyway to the select board this time, is to keep the offgoing truck and move it to backup status, so we now have 4 trucks instead of 3. That way while we're getting into that realm so often of having a truck down, it's tough because you can't just pick up the phone and ask somebody for an automated collection truck to come in.
Didn't you also mention during one of the meetings that the rate at which they're filling, they're having to make more trips back to offload, so that also is becoming problematic with how many trucks are running?
So I kind of gave that caveat right at the beginning that so far we're able to maintain with just 2 trucks a day. Danielle's right. As the town grows and as our number of barrels in town grows, it's getting to be a trick. So we're close to having to decide if we're going to run 5 days a week instead of just the 4, Tuesday through Friday. If we're going to add just kind of, right now we've been sort of just sucking it up. The guys have a little bit of overtime each week, but it's manageable. But do we add a 3rd truck a couple hours a day for those 4 days to help either truck or both trucks pick up? Do we add that 5th day? Do we go to 2 trucks a day? So I think all that stuff is on the table as we go forward. We're not there yet. We're able to still get it done between 40 and 42 hours a week for each of the 2 drivers that are normally there. But that being said, even anytime anytime somebody's on vacation or whatever, the normal 2 drivers, now we're putting a person who doesn't normally drive the truck in their place, so they're always longer. So sometimes you might see the trucks driving around at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, usually on a Friday, which is always fun. But that's why it's either a driver that's not normally in that truck, or a truck was broken down for some period of time and no barrels were collected for a couple hours in the middle of the day. So that's a position none of us want to be in, is picking up trash on Mass Road during the rush hour in the afternoon. But so I think for those 2 reasons, both for the reliability and the lack of ability to get a hired truck to come in and pick up trash barrels on short notice for us, and then the fact that in the near future we're probably going to need to start putting a 3rd or 4th vehicle into service regularly anyway. I think it's a good idea to have 2 backups.
Question. This is just for my own knowledge. Like the new housing project down the road from me, that's all private road, and so there's no trash pickup in those areas. They're responsible, I guess.
Yes, and so are we talking?
Yeah.
Are we talking about the the mill apartments or the villa?
I'm talking the Villa Fields.
Villa Fields, the two, Villa Way and
Whatever.
Angel Point.
Angel Circle or something.
Yeah,
So
Angel
those are,
Point.
so those are both private roads. We, by current town solid waste ordinance, we do not pick up trash on private roads.
Okay.
For that particular project, the planning board, as conditions of approval, said that we will not be picking up trash or recycling on this road. But our solid waste ordinance does say for any private street or condo development, if they petition the town to pick up recycling, we'll do it, as long as they give us a waiver of liability that if we drive on a private road and something happens, we're not gonna hold them responsible for any damage to our truck, you know. Or they will be responsible, I should say, for any damage. So if we revise solid waste ordinance, I'd like to make that a topic of discussion, certainly,
Oh,
because
that was just gonna be my next question.
it kind of bumps up against the planning board's regs too, if they have it as a condition of approval. I think that's good answer for me to be able to give these people, but the next condo or the last condo development, which might not have had that as a condition, I can't really stop them from asking, and the board
Interesting.
may or may not say yes. Some historical information too. We had there was a town was taken to court by one of the condominium developments and required by court order required to pick up recycling as long as we pick it up for other residences. So we kind of have to, I think, have some kind of provision.
Oh, no, I'm good. Okay.
Okay, and then the last two, we have portable message trailers in town, and the two that we have currently are pretty rough. They are hand crank, there's a cable and some pulleys, and speaking from personal experience, it gets a little scary when cable snaps, when it's halfway up from its resting position. There's nothing to hold, so the whole sign comes down when that happens, and you get a snapped cable pretty close to your face because it's a pretty small crank right next to it. But the frames themselves are starting to rust out. Some of the charging system, the electronics in it are pretty old at this point. They're a little larger than we probably need for our speed roads. You know, if you have an interstate, you need a big sign. 30 to 35 mile an hour roads, you don't really need the interstate size sign. So as we go forward, we'd like to right size those a little bit. Some of the newer models have the ability for remote changing. So if you have a message and I need to change it to current, reflect current events, you can do it from a computer or a tablet or from a cell phone.
That was a question I had.
So that's kind of the way we'd like to move with those. We are using some highway funds to get two more, so we'll have a total of, not total 8, total of 4. But I'd like to replace the old 2 that we have, so we've got enough for both construction projects, and special events are usually where we seem to get, especially during the summer, repeatedly asked. So National Night Out might want some, but we've got a South Mast project going on, and I can't afford to peel those off for a National Night Out if they're currently in use. There's some restrictions on, not restrictions, but the federal MUTCD guidance for portable message signs, variable message signs that like these are, recommend only using them for traffic related purposes. You don't want to put, tag sale ahead, please stop kind of thing. We usually get around some of that by saying, pumpkin regatta ahead, watch for traffic, or so, we kind of make if it's going to be a traffic impacting event when we get a special event permit.
I think they're good for those traffic impacting events.
Or closing bridges.
Closing bridges for sure. Yeah. So I'd like to replace the 2 that we have, and then we'll be in pretty good shape.
Okay, so then as we look, I guess everybody, just take a look at, as I had mentioned, so it seems like he's got them grouped, when you look at line 76, or really even 81, we're fairly even as we look at the bunches of equipment across the CIP.
That brings up one last point that I didn't mention. Anytime we purchase something that's recycling related, we're eligible to apply for New Hampshire the Beautiful grants. That's managed by the Northeast Resources Recycling Association, I think is NRRA's official name. They are sort of our broker in New England for recycling efforts, everything from regular single stream to mixed sort, separated stream to tires and freon bearing appliances, that kind of stuff. So they help towns either go out to bid, or they go out to bid and give us a list of vendors to use, and they kind of manage that whole realm. So they're really helpful there, but one of their functions is also to work with I think it's the New Hampshire Bottlers Association or something, as part of some settlement probably, but the beer and soda folks have developed this New Hampshire Beautiful Fund to be able to pay back communities for recycling efforts. So anytime we buy any recycling vehicles or equipment such as compactors, the skid steer loaders that we use in the recycling building, we're eligible to apply, and I think we haven't been turned down before. Usually if you apply, you get funding, and normally it's $5,000 kind of as a cap. They've got more to spend, but usually there's enough applicants, they kind of try to limit you to $5,000. So we've plugged in $5,000 anytime in any given year that's got a recycling related
Hey, $5,000, $5,000 now.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat program, and not a whole high hurdle to jump either as far as grants go, which is nice.
Does anybody have any questions for Parks and Rec, sorry, the vehicles? Go ahead.
So I noticed we have there's another Peterbilt, that's like, is that another dump truck? I'm looking like all the way on line 74, I know it's all the way out in 2029, but
Yes.
is that?
Yeah. So that's the newest curbside truck that we have right now is the 2019. We've got a truck that's was in previous year's budget and was ordered, but still has not been delivered. So we think it looks like November, December we'll finally get that truck that was on 2022's CIP. So that these trucks, because they have to, you get the lead time from the chassis, the truck company manufacturer, then they finally deliver it to the body company who puts the trash piece on it, and then you get their lead time. So it's almost a 2-year process from ordering to getting it. So we're still waiting. So right now the oldest truck we have is that 371. Yes. Newest truck that we have, I'm sorry, is 371.
Okay.
So that would be the game plan. We'd replace one in 24, and then in 29 replace the next one.
It's kind of sad we don't have any recycling in 2027. It's like left out.
I know, right?
Your trailer hot top doesn't have a, that's big, I think. It's line 73 in the big matrix. Looks like it doesn't have a.
Doesn't even have a dollar
It doesn't
figure.
have a dollar
Oh man, look at that. Sorry about that. Good eyes.
Pluck it in a low year. I don't notice.
What year was
Is
that
it in
going
your
in?
papers?
2029?
I only have in my worksheets. I only have the 24.
Oh, okay.
I have the total number for all the years, but only the actual details for the first year. I'll plug in that. That's probably that one's a smaller trailer, so at most 30,000. Let me talk to my
Which year?
equipment manager though. That'd be for a year 2029 or 2028. If I put it in 28, it'll kind of balance out with 29, but. Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Good eyes, Jim.
No, I just bored. I will note that.
That's being very observant.
Your budget goes really far if you don't put any dollars. I'm replacing 20 trucks.
No, it's free.
Yeah, it's in the Cracker Jack box.
Yep.
Right.
At one of my towns, the town meeting, the public works director was apologizing for replacing the town's sole dump truck that was 25 years old. And I began to appreciate our CIP plan a little more.
It's tough, and these poor towns, I've talked about it a few times, these poor towns have garage fires, in the middle of the winter and lose their whole fleet, or if their whole fleet is one truck, that's a uphill battle.
Speaking of that, how has the improvements that was approved
Have the improvements that were approved been completed yet? So,
I
we're
was
in-
gonna say, how they going?
We're
not-
still in the, okay, good. We are still in the middle of the ventilation portion. We're having a very hard time finding someone who can perform the sprinkler portion of that work. There's a few state vendors for sprinklers, and both of them declined to even come out to take a look at the project. They're too busy. We've made a few calls and received either no thanks or no calls back whatsoever. So right now, I've got the now Captain Fire Marshal Bill Connors looking into the folks that he deals with for permitting to see if any of them are interested in responding to him, if they have open permit requests or something. You know, he's kind of got a little bit of a stick that I don't have. But my hope, we're starting to run out of time because that was an article that will lapse if we can't
If we can't get it done.
get
We
it going
already
by the
did.
end of the year. So it's now we're into year 2. Yeah. Yep.
So if we get under contract with someone, we can.
Worst case scenario, we could find somebody to do a design for us and order all the materials, and then it would be the install, you know, which would still be a hefty price tag, but at least it wouldn't be lost money. We can get the materials in-house. But it's a tough, it's tough right now for all the trades.
All right, any final thoughts? Okay, we will let you go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I tap danced way too long. Corey's still not here, so I don't know what you do about
I know, we're just,
What do you
what
mean?
is it, 3 lines, 2 lines?
You get to see you twice today, I'm pretty excited.
No, every day's a good day when I get to see Brad. All right, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good luck with the rest of the night.
So I've got word that they will not be able to attend tonight.
Okay.
They're wondering if there's any possibility of the committee having them present at the 20th, if you guys call a meeting for the 20th.
Take care, everybody.
Well, doesn't that really throw us off a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, they do have their sheets in the book, and their information is on the matrix. They do have some general information, kind of 1 line per year based on their project plan, but I wouldn't have any specifics if there were any questions about which, you know, which lines are being proposed for each year outside of what's on their sheet.
So, I think I had introduced this earlier, I don't even know if we started the meeting at that point, but, you know, I guess for me, the important number is on 175. We look right across that line and everything is 0 because the sewer commission is funded through,
They're self-funded.
right, they're
Yeah, they're
self-funded.
self-funding.
So I guess my inclination would be to say, the numbers look great, and I don't know what the presentation would be useful for. And I don't want to hold up our process, but unless anyone feels like you have a strong need to ask someone questions or get a presentation, or Jim's frowning at that, so do we need them to come in?
Well, there's 2 functions, well, multiple functions. One is to even out tax impact. The second is to make sure our capital needs are being addressed, or at least we're proposing, for the infinite wisdom of the voters, whether they want fire trucks or dump trucks.
Right.
So I think we need more than that, but does it require a presentation as long as they can make some showing that, yes, we have a plan for sewer replacement?
Right, well, and I mean, we do have the sheets.
Yeah, and so, you know,
Right.
maybe we have it, but I think it's not just a tax impact.
A few years ago, when they came in, they told us that for the next several years, they would be concentrating on projects in Pinardville because the infrastructure in Pinardville is so old and worn out. And if you look at the memo for these projects for the next few years, they all are in Pinardville, and they're all replacement of lines, which is what they told us they were going to be doing.
Are these the only, does this cover all of Pinardville? The roads that need the lines replaced or Yeah, it's all replacement, so.
I don't know
I don't
if after 2029 will be more. I wouldn't know that.
What line is our sewer on?
So,
It's
I'm
on
sorry,
the
it's
page
page
of
five.
5
One
Top of page 5.
Oh,
Yes, it starts at
Very
the top,
last page.
165.
509.
Yes. Page 509 of the matrix.
And for what they're looking to be doing, the roads that they indicate on the memo, the costing relatively flat. It's not, well,
Yeah, they said
it
that,
varies, but
there's a kind of a range of how much linear footage they can accomplish in a single year.
Right.
And of course, where there are natural kind of breaking points where, roads turn or whatever. And last time they had also explained that they're trying to keep their projects in line with the road plan, so they're not digging up a road and repaving it
Yeah.
to then have to
Do it again.
do it again. So they try to align with where DPW is already going to be doing work.
that's right.
Is there, because obviously like their amount of collected fees, it varies every single year, and that's exactly how much that they're spending. Are they only spending what they're collecting, or, I guess,
They're collecting more than they're showing here.
okay.
They have money in savings and,
Right, because I know they have that if there's like a catastrophic failure of the entire sewer.
yes, they do have, it's similar to how we have a capital reserve fund. They have a capital reserve fund, but rather than deposits being approved by the voters, there's a special RSA that allows the sewer commission as a governing body specifically for the purposes of sewer to establish that capital reserve fund and make deposits into it of their excess from each year. So they have that built up and they draw against that for these large projects, any emergencies, any additional operating costs or things of that nature. So they do have the funding available. On this sheet, they're just showing that they can fully offset their proposed appropriation cost for these specific projects.
But they must have a multiplier based on the linear fee,
Yes, they have
looking at the numbers.
estimated their numbers based on the linear feet and costs that they can reasonably estimate, just like other groups. The projects 24 to 28 were of course on last year's CIP. So those are repeats. They've just shifted them up a year and adjusted costs if need be. And then 29 would be the newest one, which is Rochambeau.
I guess it boils down to, do we feel like we have questions about this that we would need answered by a representative?
I don't think so.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I realize the presentation is not that long, and it's self-funded. It's kind of nice to hear, from the horse's mouth, what's going on, and have they encountered any problems or anything? Just rather than looking at numbers.
Well, we could invite them to the next meeting, definitely.
It would be a short
We do intend to
presentation.
hold the meeting on the 20th. We have other items to cover. So, and as you said, when we start thinking about our bottom line and juggling, it doesn't, I guess that's not really going to change what we discuss in that. So sure, why don't we have them come to the next meeting on the 20th?
Okay.
Okay, so, Doreen, do you want to do housekeeping first when we talk about items for the next meeting? So, first item, I guess, is we did not have meeting minutes to approve tonight. They were not here because of the holiday and because the meeting was just last week. So we will have 2 sets of meeting minutes to approve next week. So we don't have to deal with that tonight. And then the second, I'm going to let Danielle cover basically what we talked about in the email that you had sent me.
Sure. So the other items that we had kind of on our radar included the red line draft that the committee discussed last week. You had a couple specific changes that you asked us to capture in a draft. And Joanne and I, as part of that, want to look through the full handbook to see if there's anything else that stands out to us that we'd want to bring to this committee's attention for consideration. Again, because of that quick turnaround with last week to this week, we didn't get to complete that process. So at the 20th, we'd like to bring a copy of the draft where you can see any markups that we have suggested for you to consider, and then make any changes or recommendations formally at that point to the planning board. We did confirm that the planning board would have to accept any changes that this committee proposes, because the authority granted by the voters was specifically to the planning board for CIP planning.
Would it be possible to have that emailed to us prior to the meeting?
Read my mind. Thank
And then
you.
Danielle, I believe we talked about, so we need to make a motion tonight to do something.
Well, not specifically.
Yeah.
The other components to discuss, which could be either discussed tonight or at the next meeting, would be if there are any projects that the committee would like to shift around, we would recommend that you review that tonight, so that at the next meeting on the 20th, we could bring you a final matrix that includes any shifts that the committee would like to make. So that way you can see what that would look like before you make your final recommendation to the planning board.
Right.
And then the other item would be, probably the next meeting would be just to discuss how you want to split up the reporting process. You know, is the chair going to compile the written report? Are committee members going to assist in that part? How the presentation might go in September to the planning board.
And then the final thing was whether you wanted to call in on back end.
Anyone else?
Okay.
So this way we can notify them.
I know I didn't come here prepared to look at what possibly could be moved, if anything. I was counting on that being the next meeting. Yeah, and
I know the ones that we had talked about in the past was, I think it was like the records management for the police department.
Yeah, I had one circled.
Like that was like a 2027, and then we were like, there was the idea of like 2025. And then there was another one that I remember that was like 90,000 that we did right in the beginning.
The software refresh?
Yeah, for the,
2025 is a total that stands out really high
Right.
until you get to 2029, but that'll change. 2025 is around the corner. I don't know what makes that up, but like I said, I didn't come in here
I think it was,
looking for something happening.
But are you looking at the matrix on line 316 to?
Yeah, hopefully I'm looking at the
I mean,
right
don't
thing.
forget that
Am I not-
projects that are bonded, they're shown as a gross cost in the year it's approved, but
Oh,
not
here we go.
the annual tax impact, correct?
Okay.
Are you looking,
Have the right one.
Town projects, town
are you
vehicles,
looking at the
school
one that was
projects.
passed out tonight, or?
Well, that was
I'm
the
trying to-
school one,
Trying to
but
keep track of
that was
what.
This
just-
says
that was
6-1.
But the general combined
The
matrix
combined one, yeah?
doesn't reflect what the school
Right.
gave us.
I do have up on my screen those new changes. If you'd like, we could put the projector on if you guys all want to look at the same document, or we could bring a printed version next
What's
time.
the date of the one
But
you're
I
looking at?
incorporated what the school had
6-1.
provided for
Me too.
updated information, as well as the change Adam had tonight for that one trailer amount that had been missed, so that those are captured in the lines, in the totals.
Okay, so Kelly does not have the 614
I still don't have an updated matrix.
matrix.
This is a master matrix?
So the,
I don't have
Yeah, I
one.
don't have it.
614 I don't have. I have a
Right.
6-1.
It's the one that, it's,
right.
Oh, I have
that's
this,
what we
the
have.
town
The
and
town.
the school, but I don't have a combined one.
Nobody does at
Right.
this point.
That's right.
The school gave us their updates yesterday.
Oh, okay,
and,
okay.
I can print it if you'd like, we can run upstairs and I can grab copies if that's easier.
Well, I think, so let's look at two things. So you should have in your notebooks the matrix, the 9-page matrix that is, the date on the top corner is 6/15/23. So that's what we've all been working off of.
No, I'm working off of 6-1.
No.
The one's 6-15.
Did you miss the meeting where we handed it out, maybe?
I may have, yeah.
Okay.
Jim, I know
His
it was in the beginning of it, in the beginning of the month.
I have one that's dated 6/1, but I did miss it.
Okay.
That's a problem.
Like, I'm realizing, I'm like 9 of 9. I'm like,
I got
I
6:15.
end at 5 of 9.
No,
Three.
okay,
That's
is
what I
this
did.
yours?
Town only. You can have that.
4, 5.
Okay,
You know what?
so what should I
Probably
look
the
at?
school portion would be my
Okay.
guess. But I think they're all
I
that
feel
way.
like I
Okay,
missed
so
something.
Danielle, that is a good point. We have 9 pages of a matrix, and we all seem to only have 5 of 9.
Right. Oh, thank you. It's not. I'm like, okay,
The 615 one, that is the town portion only, including any updates that had come forward through the first couple rounds of presentations. At the time, the decision was made not to reprint the entirety of the matrix because the school hadn't presented yet. At the last meeting, the school had presented, and they gave to you an update, which we passed out tonight, which includes the feedback from this committee and their bonding. So this is what gets copy and pasted into the master matrix to incorporate their projects and the town projects together.
So who would not have the most updated altogether?
We do not have them, a together matrix has not been created yet.
So the one
It's
we got
on my
handed-
screen only,
The one we got handed tonight are like,
school
pages
only.
6, 7, 8, and 9.
Yes, think of them as 6, 7, 8, and 9. The only thing that you don't have on this, on what would be page 9, is the bottom line total. And that's the
I
part
understand
that we could,
So
we could
just
print or put on
to
screen.
clarify, Danielle, on the school matrix, there's this amount down here that says total budget. Is that the number, that 53 million?
So
number?
That's school only, though.
that's,
Correct, I'm just
Right.
clarifying that that's the correct number from the school year over year.
Are you looking at, on the new one?
The very,
Line
this
134?
very last page, the blue and yellow.
There are
Oh,
no
that-
numbers.
so,
The synopsis.
no, that's including not just their CIP, but their entire operating budget. So as you can see at the top of that page, Scott has indicated what the March warrants were projected at for his general fund, his, help me out, Ellen, on the fund numbers, Fund 21 and 22, I'm not sure which one's food or
10,
grant.
21, and 22.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one's which. I know 10 is his general fund, 21 is, I believe, might be the food service, I'm not sure on his fund number
I
there.
don't know either.
And one of them's his grant.
So if we go to the page prior to that, page 4 of 4, the total school projects after revenues would be the year-over-year number for CIP only. Is that correct?
He actually put a note on line 128 that says the revenue lines shown below have not been updated. So that's what I was working on today. I was able to incorporate that. The totals that you see revised subtotal for district-wide, that's, looks like the total across all projects.
Oh, because I see. So what really was changed was if we look at line 126, Scott has sort of pulled everything from lease and bond payments out, right?
Yes, so he had put together the line above it, line 125, projects without the cost of projects that'll be leased or bonded, and then instead added line 126 to show what that lease or bond payment is projected to be in each of the given years.
But the
So-
cost would be.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that you can consider, when you do the tax impact, you're considering the projects that are not funded by a lease, as well as the cost of those projects as shown on a lease. So the revised subtotal is the appropriation amount that would be proposed for that given year, the line in red.
Excluding, though, they would still be coming forward for, as it's noted, the lease and the bond in 24 and 25.
Yes, but it would,
I don't know if this is.
it's including what he estimates those first couple years of bonding payments would be, the interest-only payments. He's got a memo line on the right, far right, that indicates that a $60 million bond interest-only cost is shown and in some of those outer years. So in trying to incorporate the bottom line, we were adding in the proposed bond schedule that he's showing here as part of the cost in the given year that he's allocated it to, in addition to that subtotal without the cost of the bonded, so that we're only counting the bonds once as a bond payment rather than as a full project cost.
One time in 1 year.
So that's if a bond gets passed.
Yes. It works off of the assumptions that certain projects would be financed through leases or bonds would be approved. At this point, he's indicating they're not proposing to do the full cost of the project if it had to be solely funded by taxes.
So which number should we use?
For the school, I would
Yes.
use line 127,
Okay.
which is the line in red.
Just a clarifying question. The school year goes from, for example, July 1st,
Yes.
2023 to June 30th, 2024. Okay.
Correct.
So is there then a way to, I mean, so theoretically, line 127 gets added on to the bottom of our CIP?
It replaces what's already in there for the school.
Okay.
Yeah, that line number.
Because we don't
If you
have,
add that to the town's
yeah,
matrix
that's what I
from
mean.
June 15th,
So the town's line 179.
yes, plus the
All
school's
right,
line
so
126.
2024, we are at 8,297,746.
So I have a different number than you do.
Okay, awesome. How is it different?
so I think
I
what we
think
need
the
to
issue is
do
the shift of the school year.
is have you merge these, because I don't feel, I appreciate Kelly trying to do the math, but I feel like I'm not there mentally with this one, not lining up for me. This is really hard. And especially given that we've had other comments tonight that you're not ready to take a look at the balance. Like maybe the next meeting is the meeting where we need to look at the balance. If you will rework this so that we have it all together. That's gonna help me mentally, because there's a lot of numbers here. So-
I guess what I'm
A lot of
getting
numbers
at
and lots of paper.
is
Right.
how, this is really frustrating me. Because we have to do this based on when we vote. So
Right.
this is not accurate, the school
So the school,
CIP.
the school one shifts over a year. So you can see how we normally have 6, and if you look at the school lines K through Q is 7 years, because they're showing line, column K is 23 to 24. That's this year. That's already in this year's budget.
Right, I get
So-
that. But I guess what I'm getting at is,
So when we look at CIP 2024 for the budget, you're looking at 24, 25 on the school's grid.
Do we want school to come back?
So
and
that's
go
what we
over
align
this?
with our,
Well, like,
no, I just want a number, because I feel like for our next meeting, to even look at what to move around, I need numbers year over year.
Right.
Because I know this year where we have 11 million plus 1 million from the school, we're most likely gonna move some projects forward or projects back off of that year, I would
Right.
assume. But I would like solid numbers for voting year. And this one, if the school one doesn't match the town one based on when we're passing budgets, I know you're working on it, but I feel like I need that before our next meeting.
yep, yeah, Scott delivered this to us yesterday,
Yeah,
and so
I
I just
understand,
merged
right.
it into the matrix for consideration. So that's what I'm seeing at this point. And like I said, we can print it out, we can provide it electronically, we could do both. I wasn't sure where the committee felt, if there were other changes that the committee may have heard in earlier presentations that they'd want us to also capture, because if we print it, we bring it to you at the next meeting, and then 20 changes are made, are you then ready to go to September to present. I'm not sure, that's totally up to you guys. I just know it can be really confusing moving the columns around.
No, I get it, and it's a fast turnaround, so I'm not blaming you and combining the matrix.
I'm very confused. So like, for instance, last year with the library, they put the whole amount, 7 million or whatever it was. And then they said how they were proposing to supply the money. So in this case, in their case, it was a bond. In this case, it's also some bonds and some leases. So wouldn't we, or shouldn't we be looking at the entire amount as well?
Well, isn't the question, there's a political question, and then there's an actual tax impact question.
Right.
And our charge is to look at tax impact. How the school board and the select board choose to present it is a political question, just how many bonds they want to place on the warrant. But let's assume a bond could go out for, pick a number, 50 years. I made that up, they don't. Does it really matter what it is that they're approving in year one? Because that's not the tax impact, in real tax impact. In the voters' minds, they look at that number and say, oh, we can't do that. Well, if they thought about it, they'd say, yes, we can, but that's a political question. That's not our job. Our job, I think, is to show tax impact. It's useful information for school board and select board to see what the bonds are that they're approving, so when they decide to go forward. But I think that's a little outside of our statutory role. We can add that as additional information, but I think it's inappropriate to focus on that number.
Because the reason I ask is because it doesn't look like we're comparing apples to apples between the school and the town.
If you're not consistent, that's correct.
Right.
And I think what Scott did was smart, and he did what Jim is stating, like we're looking at the tax impact if these bonds were passed. But you're also right that, you know, Rick just put the pool in there, like the total amount. Like so the other departments didn't necessarily spread it out that way, and that's a challenge. Like, can you analyze that? Can we get it all broken out so that it's a little more the same?
So part of why last year we had presented the full cost and then the full offsetting revenue was because of the discussion and the fact that we hadn't done bonds in quite a while. We weren't sure if that was a direction that the board would be willing to go. And what we found that to be an issue for planning purposes is it netted the project to zero. It showed a full revenue offsetting it, and it made it look like there was zero tax impact, which really kind of messed with the numbers. So in the discussion with the school this year, we realized it would probably be better to show what you're proposing the project's funding source to be and what you think, with the best guess of what that cost would be. We certainly can go through, and I have estimates for current bond bank estimates in the current market of what the first couple years of a payment would look like on some of these bonds if a project were to be bonded. We can certainly go through the departments, anyone who has a bond proposed. I think it was just the school, and the Parks and Rec.
Well, Master Road Fire Station.
And the fire station.
The library.
And the library.
And
So there's like 4 or 5 of them.
And the police department. Yeah.
I knew what I was saying.
Yeah, sports complex.
So I can work through some of those and talk with the departments about providing a number for consideration.
As long as it says somewhere, whether it's in the memo or, I don't want to screw up the columns that get added, but the total amount approved by voters X year, and then for the purposes of our review of the total tax impact year to year, estimate what, like Scott did, what it would cost for each of those bonds. That tells the voters, it tells us, it tells everybody what the whole thing will cost total, but then how it's going to impact us year to year to year.
Yeah, I think the hesitation on the town side was the school board had a discussion and had agreed that they're going to be looking into these financing options, whereas on the town side, these projects are identified from the department as a need, but they have not discussed with the select board if they'd be willing to consider bonding or financing these projects. So they may show up in the matrix as a department thinking, hey, hey, this is a cost that's gonna need to be bonded or somehow financed or discussed, and that's how they're flagging it as a funding source. But without that direction from the select board, I think they were a little bit hesitant to try and estimate numbers, especially since project costs are sometimes placeholders, like $20 million, but they may or may not accurately reflect if that project were to occur.
But if that's the case, I don't want to prolong this discussion, but it's, I don't want to say irresponsible, it's hard for us to start making decisions about moving projects around to equalize tax impact when we don't know what the actual tax impact is going to be. All we know is the gross cost.
And it's understandable that, I mean, so there may be, say, 4 or 5 items on here that are identified as bond. And could we, I mean, this is a numbers game, right? We're playing, you know, could we, right, we're not going to pay the $4 million for the pool that one year, likely not. So, you know, could we, I guess, what are some safe assumptions we can build in so that we can compare them together?
I think that on the town side, we don't have a lot of those options, because we know, for example, that we need a police department, but we don't know where that will be located, and that's part of the planning process that we just don't have the answers for. Just as, you know, the school proposing a new building, that's also not a real number. They have the land, but that's, do you know what I mean? Like, a lot of this is hypothetical.
You can get generalized costs per square foot for these things.
Jim?
I think it's appropriate for us in our role to recommend how these could be funded and make some assumptions and identify those assumptions. This is our assumption if these projects are bonded, if not.
Right.
And if
Because
you show-
ultimately it's a planning tool.
And if you show in the matrix, people to my right are groaning, both gross annual appropriation amount in one,
Yeah,
and
in the
then a
memo.
bonded, assumed bonding amount in another, it shows at least a range of options, there's stuff in between. You know,
And we
CIP.
struggled with that last year with the library bond,
Right.
because going to bond council, it's all hypothetical,
Of
right?
course it
So,
is.
you know, that,
And-
I think we came up with a good way to do that last year, but it was a table of options.
And any projection of costs into the future are based on assumptions anyway, it's best guess. And in the end, the actual decision of how to proceed is not made by us, we're just advisors.
Right.
Just present numbers and options. Otherwise, I don't know how you can start saying, well, projects should be moved around in different years, unless it's, you know, clear. The other component of that is, we don't know what project actually can be done in certain years based on the short presentation, so we've shied away from horsing around too much, especially on construction projects, because there's, you know, other variables, so
Right.
don't get too carried away in our own powers.
Well, and I think that's what happens, you know, like so the pool is an example in the library, like they're victims of their number, but, you know, we're not going to fund a $4 million pool in 1 year. There'll have to be some sort of vehicle to spread that out. So, right, how do we make those decisions without sort of making some generalized assumptions of this is going to be spread out in some way? Does that make sense, Danielle? Can we run that exercise and see how that works?
And not be shot by her.
Somebody super smart with math could probably just do this great and
Yeah,
Not me.
I can certainly bring that back and, you know, spell out what assumptions were taken in the calculation, because,
Right.
you know, if we do it over 20 years or 30 years, it could be a totally different number, so,
And I think you just pick a number in 20 years, it's understandable.
yeah. Probably, I'll judge it based on the proposed gross appropriation cost for the project. I mean, a pool for 4 million, not likely to be a
Right.
20-year, but, you know, it might do a shorter term.
Well,
10
I
years.
know, like Scott said that they're, like the bonds come in all different shapes and
They do.
sizes. And so like there's computers that are bonded for a year. And then there's buildings that are bonded for 30 years. So like there must be some kind of template. Like it must be like pools are bonded no more than
We tried to.
20 years, but no less than 10 years or something.
Yeah, we do try to take the projected lifespan of what's being purchased or built into consideration when we determine the bonding term. There obviously can be still movement within those based on what the decisions are when you get to that political level of actually putting something into play, but we can certainly make reasonable assumptions.
I think if we do that, it's going to be a more useful presentation than what we've done in the past.
So Danielle, so for Parks and Rec, for the sports complex, Rick wrote on here bond for phase 2 and 3.
Okay.
But we didn't bond the other portion, the first part, phase 1. So can we confirm if he meant bond? I feel
can
like
talk with
maybe
him.
it wasn't meant to be that, but it says it.
I'll check with him. He may be proposing a different funding mechanism this time, but I'll
I
ask.
don't, being on the commission, I don't remember, you can check with Pam. I don't remember there being a bond item.
I don't believe they're meant to be, but it says bond. So I want to make sure that that's
That's
not
good.
included or is included
Okay.
based on
Good
that
question.
answer. Additionally, so I guess I'm thinking about, as we're having this bond discussion, the centralized pool at Barnard Park. It is put in for 2024 as the whole amount. I'm on line 147.
Right.
It is, yeah.
So I guess if we were to, so with all of these potential bonds on the table, there's only one that's in this year, or next budget year.
Except
Do
the
we-
school.
I'm sorry, I'm talking just about the two. Do we, yeah, I guess I'm struggling how to put it on a matrix also. Yeah.
And how are all these different ones, like I said, there's 4 or 5, where are they coming in the years? Those, it sounded to me like they were coming within a year or two of each other. And how does that get presented all the way around, talking everything?
Well,
And do we do it at once? I don't know.
Well,
Not
you're
my
gonna show,
decision anyway.
if you do what you don't have to do what I suggested, but you're gonna show a total amount of appropriation in a particular year to scare
Right.
everybody. But the actual cost of the bonded projects theoretically can be spread out. Right? So it's math, but, so you have two columns or 2 sections separate this.
Because that is the reality, is as Kylie was saying, we're not gonna go to the voters in 2024 and say we need $4 million for the pool. We're gonna propose some sort of
Finance.
financing mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, we could also consider on the matrix trying to show a line of gross appropriation and then a potential bonding version so that you can kind of see them side by side.
Right.
I know it's kind of a lot to look at when you get into those multiple totals, but we could try that as a way to visually show it.
Okay.
Okay.
Because although you're looking at, and again, I'm talking compact red, at the 4.1 or 4.2, whatever you want to use, they're showing offsetting revenue possibly at 500,000 from a grant and 80,000 from impact fees, bringing it down to 3.6. That would be the amount they're looking to bond.
Okay.
But you still have to vote the appropriation of the gross amount.
Right, and obviously
Yeah.
it would be spread out over a certain number of years, depending on the length of the bond.
But I think that's the thing that I'm struggling with, because we're not really approving in the matrix bond amounts. You know what I mean? Like, I think we still have a responsibility to spread the total amount of the pool over a couple years at least to simulate that, and then whether or not we choose to bond that is a different story. I guess that's what I'm having a hard time with, because us looking at bond amounts or looking at total cost
I
is
believe,
still super hypothetical.
I, 2 things. One is that I believe the study that they had on the pools showed that that pool was, really in bad shape. And it says here that it was pushed out from 2023 to 2024. So I believe, and I could be totally wrong, but I believe that Rick did intend that it would be done in that 1 year because of the safety factors involved. But also, I've been on CIP myself. In fact, I chaired it for a few years. And I never remember if something was a bond, like I said before, the library and some other things that we were looking at, it always just had the full amount of the project.
And that's why it was not a very useful tool.
Right.
Don't keep repeating what we did in the past when it was not useful.
I'm not saying it was useful, I'm just saying that's how it was always done, so.
And kids
So now-
kids used to die of polio, so let's move on.
But I guess to your point, Joanne, even if it is $4 million next year, which I guess we need to get clarification on that, should we just spread it out over, $1 million for the next 4 years?
No.
Well, isn't that accomplishing
No,
what?
because projects are more efficient if done all at once and not phased.
But if we're bonding, we're not paying that amount
That's
in
correct.
1 year.
Well,
No.
then I guess it boils down to what Danielle was saying before, is to have those two columns, the real cost of the full amount, and then if we were to bond it, what the cost would be per year.
Yeah, I get it, but we don't
It's
even
just
have
very
an actual cost
confusing.
for
Right.
the pool or a bond amount.
But CIP is just based on assumed costs. These numbers aren't the final numbers. They go in the warrant.
Right.
There's large sharpened pencils that between here and there.
No, I understand that, but that's, putting estimated bond percentages, I don't think is helpful just at the fluctuation that we've had in the past.
Could we have both, could we have both matrices done in both ways? And the school has done where they've just done really the bond amounts over a period of time, which makes their numbers look fantastic. I mean,
Well,
2029 to 2030, there's a whole new,
Surprise.
there's a whole new school in there, and it's, their cost impact is $3 million, right? 3.5 million, and then you compare that to 2025, where the pool hasn't been bonded out, and it doesn't make their numbers look as good, and I think it is misleading, but I think that there's merits to having it presented in both ways. So,
I think that's what the request was to have two lines, one showing the gross appropriation and one showing if it were to be bonded.
okay.
But do you prefer to have it on two separate matrices? One version being.
Well, I guess in the sense that these two matrices are separate currently.
Yeah.
So if they're combined all together, then it's fine.
But it can be down at the bottom, at your sum lines that you put at the end of the matrix of all the.
Yeah, we could do
That'd be
it on
two
Yeah.
lines there.
Yeah.
But not two separate matrices.
Yeah, I guess I just meant in
Because
the
we'll get
fact
too
that-
confused looking at those.
Yeah, that these are two separate pieces
Yeah.
of paper.
Danielle, if we were to approve a bond, it would get removed from the matrix because then it would go into the budget. So.
What do you mean?
If these numbers for the school, if it, the way that Scott broke it out, that would roll into the budget because we have to make the bond payment, correct? So it would be put into the budget.
In the future years?
Correct, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So were all of the numbers that would be included in that removed from their CIP matrix,
That's
the amounts?
what I believe Scott's indicated here. I mean, I can talk with him specifically about what calculations and formulas were used in the individual cells. But yes, I believe he has a line here that says, total projects without the cost of projects that would be leased or bonded.
Okay. I just want to clarify because.
And then it replaced it with the line below it showing the lease and bond.
No, I'm open to looking at it both ways for sure, if that's helpful, but I want to be conscious of the amount of work that it is for you, so I just want to make sure they actually are the same, so that
Yeah,
you don't
and-
have to do it again.
And I think with the bonding projects, what's kind of, difficulties, looking from a planning perspective, you have the initial year, the appropriation of when the bond would potentially go on a warrant article. And then you have the reality of what would that look like? If we're not asking the voters to pay this by taxes in one single year, what does that look like in a planning mechanism? So I do see how having both versions would be helpful.
Yeah, because it's a little bit, where he's got the proposed, he's showing it each year, what the payment would be to cover the bond and lease it, but yet Parks and Rec is all in 1 year. So to me, there's a little discrepancy there.
Well, and I think it's gonna be important for Budget Committee to see what's gonna roll into the budget, if approved, for whatever comes next year.
Yeah, I mean, a lot hinges on the financing as far as, you know, even if it gets proposed and then you don't get that majority vote that's required and a bond doesn't get approved, then that obviously will shake out differently in the next year's CIP. They would come back and either propose something modified, or maybe they keep it the same and try again for a second year. I mean, it all depends on what the project is and what the need is, I think, for that project. Speaking of callbacks from prior years, is the library altering anything? I hadn't been at their initial presentation, but I wasn't sure if there was a callback need to schedule them for the next meeting.
There was,
We met last night,
We're being,
the Library Board of Trustees. I believe that they will be sending Joanne an email soon to come in and make amendments to their matrix.
Okay.
I think that was brought up at our, when they presented about perhaps being
so if
back
we look
for-
at our
Sorry, what?
schedule.
I think it was brought up, I can't remember the exact item, to bring back.
So our
I don't know,
meeting's
they're changing their stuff.
Okay.
We have to get it into the,
We build in
at some
an
point, we have
extra
to
meeting.
solidify the numbers.
Yeah, we usually, in prior years, I don't know if I said to Joanna, we don't have to do what we did before, but we scheduled a second, after the, what's called now the July 20th meeting, we've scheduled an optional, another meeting if needed, and that might be prudent, because that could be that's a significant, could be a significant consideration. So, yeah, it would, I hate to say this, it might be wise to put another possible reserve
An
date.
August meeting?
Yeah.
Can I ask Danielle what her time frame might be to get the town side of it done? Because I think if we could coincide an additional meeting with the time that she needs to do that, we could do both in the same meeting before our final meeting.
For
Like
the,
not next week, you know what I mean?
yeah, no, we could do it by the 20th, for the meeting of the 20th, if you wanted to have both the library and sewer come in for callbacks and review potential bonds. Because we're making specific assumptions on calculating those bonds, it's not going to take an excessive amount of time. I'm just going to have to plug in the most
Formula.
reasonable, assumptions.
So that is in 2 weeks from now.
That one's already scheduled the 20th, right?
Yes.
But we don't have a date on possible another one?
Well, that's just what Jim was proposing, is scheduling another meeting prior to the 20th.
You decided.
No, I don't think he was saying schedule a meeting prior to the 20th. I think he was
No,
saying
after.
if we don't get everything done on the 20th, we would schedule something after, so
Well,
so
just
say
can we come up with a date,
Oh,
and then
I'm
if
sorry.
we don't
We've
need
always
it,
had
cancel
four.
it?
Tentative one at the end.
So,
We've always had like a tentative one at the
Yeah,
end.
Right.
exactly.
you
Things
want a
weren't
date?
finished. the date
About the
was-
third.
there's 8/10,
That's the planning board
Or-
night.
is it?
I'm on vacation the 3rd, I can't do the 3rd.
So the 10th is the
Vacation's
planning
not
board
authorized.
night.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
the 10th is fine.
8/3
I can't do the 3rd.
And what
And
about
then
the
10th.
27th?
or 8/31.
I can't do the,
What about
What
July
about
27th?
8/17?
Where
That's
are we
the
going
planning
to
board
August?
meeting.
Oh, can we do a Tuesday instead? Instead of a Thursday?
I'd have to look at the budget committee, our meetings around Tuesdays.
Yeah, the budget committee has
Yeah,
a
I
meeting
can't do
on
that.
Tuesday, August 15th.
How about the 8th, August
what
8th?
about, yeah. I'll
Zoning
just-
board would have a meeting the first Tuesday of that month.
That would be,
Right.
That's the
Thursday.
sewer commission.
yeah, the first is zoning,
Yeah.
and the 8th is sewer, but they meet early. Well, we meet early too.
They meet at 6, I
Is it
think.
6?
I'm sorry, are we looking at July or August? I just want to make sure I'm
August.
looking at the right
August.
calendar. So in August, this committee typically meets on Thursdays. I know the 3rd would be available, but Kim said she's not available. The 17th would be an option.
Yeah, what about the 17th?
It's okay with me.
17th.
I have to check my social calendar.
Oh,
I'll be
17th.
gone then. Sorry,
On 17th.
but I mean, I don't need to be here.
Do you want to do it after?
You bump into Labor Day weekend, and then we come up on the 14th for our
So we're going with the 17th?
17th?
Tentative?
17?
Tentative on the 17th,
Okay,
That's
CIP,
August.
August, yes.
CIP.
So
6
that's
o'clock.
That's a
Yes.
tentative meeting if one's needed after the
Right.
July 20th.
You
Right.
have on September 4, like a calendar, planning board meeting to recommend to select board.
And what date was that?
That's not,
September 14th
that's to recommend to the planning board,
to
isn't
the
it?
planning board.
Yeah, not to the.
Us to
select
the
board.
planning
Right.
board, it's the 14th?
The 14th, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, planning board, yeah, I'll mention to Patty so she can update the schedule and make that correction.
I think we can divvy the duties up at the next meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so
I
our
mean-
next
I mean,
meeting is the
Be
20th,
absent at your peril.
and on that meeting, we're doing,
So we're meeting on the
17th.
20th,
on the
Yeah.
20th,
yes.
and what's the
And
agenda?
then, and on the
August
20th, we're doing, sewer is coming, giving their
Right.
Sewer.
presentation.
Library callback.
Do we need library to come back?
If they're gonna alter their numbers.
Okay, so we will need library to come back. And then we will also have the matrix that Danielle's going to
Put
revise
together.
to show to us, and then we will review it and make any shifting the night of the 20th as
Okay,
well.
so- Okay, and then after that, we're meeting
If we need to, we can also meet August 17th
if
Okay.
needed.
to do
Okay,
another final
That's a
shift.
tentative.
Okay,
Yes.
Then maybe we'll also take a picture. 'cause that's-
If Dan,
Yeah,
if
we
Dan
did
comes.
do the picture last week,
Yes,
but,
that's fine.
yeah.
He hasn't been
Okay.
in 3 meetings in a row.
Pictures it.
That's
We
it.
can Photoshop it.
Made the first meeting, that was
are we
it.
ready? Are we
We can
done?
reach out to
I
Ms.
think
Owen.
we are done, we've covered everything we need to cover tonight, right?
So move to, Matt,
Sure.
move to adjourn?
Let's second. Brad second.
Okay, I'm gonna-
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, okay.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.